In this lesson, we're going to review one technique to group related tests together. So let's review on the example of the first test from activities.ts.ts file. As a reminder, in here we are declaring a couple of objects, first of which is an activity object, and the second one, an object with the fields that will be assigned to the fields of the first activity object. After, we're gonna call this updateActivity function, and as you can see in here, we're using two expectations. The first one checks whether initial activity object was mutated, and the second expectation checks whether updateActivity function has returned expected value, which is updateActivity object. And there is a recommendation when writing tests. It's good to use only one assertion or expectation in one testing function. But of course, it is not the hard rule, there are always exceptional cases. But as a general guideline, it's good to stick to this rule and use only one expectation in one testing function. It will allow us to find errors easier. For example, let's consider another test from the functions.test.ts. In here, we're using lots of expectations, but all those expectations are pretty similar. We are just changing input values, but the logic remains the same. So all these expectations test same aspect of the function, but with different values. In those cases, these expectations are fine to keep in one test. But as for our test, these two expectations test different aspects of the function. The first expectation tests mutation of the original object, and the second expectation tests return value. So in this case, I'd prefer to split this test by two and place every expectation into its own testing function. So I'm going to copy over this testing function, paste it down here, and then let's also change descriptions of these functions to better reflect what these tests are testing. The first test is going to ensure that the original activity object is updated, or in other words, mutated. So in here, we don't need to use expectation that checks return value of the updateActivity function. So I'm gonna remove this expectation along with the constant which holds return value, because we're going to check whether the function returns correct value in the second test. So in here, I'm gonna remove expectation which tests if the original activity object was mutated, and keep only the one which tests return value. By the way, we don't need to create temporary variable to hold return value of the updateActivity function, since we can inline this function call and put it in here right into expect function. And eventually we'll end up with such structure of this file where we have three tests, where first two tests the same function. And in those cases, sometimes it might be useful to group such tests that test one function. And to group related tests, we can use function called describe. I'm gonna call this function in here. As the first argument, we're passing the description of the set of tests we are wrapping into this describe block. And as the second argument, we're passing the function where we're placing our tests that we'd like to group together. We gotta import function describe from the Vitest package. Then let's see what's common between these two tests. Every test declares an object updated fields, so it makes sense to reuse this object for both tests. So we can extract this object from here and paste it directly into the closure of the describe function. And then we can remove this object from individual tests. This way we are reducing duplication in tests. And by the way, this activity object is also the same in the first and the second tests. But let's not extract it yet, because there is one thing related to this object that we're going to review in one of the next lessons. And now in the terminal, we're going to see that those tests that belong to one describe block are grouped together under same heading. And by the way, all those modifiers we have previously used when calling function it, such as only or skip, they also can be applied to describe blocks. For example, if we want to run only tests from a particular describe block, we just have to use only. And now these two tests were executed, but the last one, which does not belong to this describe block, was skipped. And vice versa, if we want to skip all these tests from the describe block, we have to use skip. And this time, only one test was executed, which doesn't belong to the describe block. Now let's try to practice using describe block a little more. So inside functions.test.ts, we can split the first test by 2. Since first set of expectations checks if the function format seconds with sign works properly when passed positive amount of seconds, but the second set of expectations ensures that these functions works properly when we pass negative amount of seconds. So I'm gonna copy over this whole test, paste it down here, and in here I'm gonna just keep those function calls where we're passing negative amount of seconds. And just to improve the description of this testing scenario, I'm going to rename description and say it formats negative amount of seconds, like so. As for the first test, in here I'm gonna use almost the same description, but instead of a negative, I'm gonna use positive. In this test, we will only keep those calls of format seconds with sign function that accept positive amount of seconds. And now that we have two testing scenarios which test same function, we're gonna wrap these two tests into describe. Let's not forget and import function describe from the Vitest package and assign description to this describe block. And whenever we are grouping several tests that test the same function as a description, we can use the name of the function that we are testing. In this case, the function name is format seconds with sign. In the terminal, we're seeing all tests are passing, and two tests were grouped under same heading, format seconds with sign. Let's also check what is going to happen if we will intentionally make a mistake in one of our tests. And test runner shows us exactly the test case which has failed. At the end, let's run the whole test suite in the project and make sure that all tests are passing. Let's continue in the next lesson. Link to the source code will be in the video description.